The warning klaxons screamed through the bridge like dying animals, as Captain Nix Valvers fought to keep his ship from becoming a streak of fire across an alien sky. The Stardancer's hull groaned under atmospheric pressure it was never designed to handle, her shields flickering like dying embers as they struggled against the planet's gravity well. "Come on, beautiful," Nix whispered to his ship, hands dancing across controls that sparked and hissed in response. "Don't give up on me now." The view screen showed a world of endless crimson desert broken by crystalline formations that jutted from the surface like frozen lightning. Twin suns blazed overhead, turning the atmosphere into a furnace that his failing environmental systems could barely counter. This wasn't supposed to happen. What should have been a simple cargo run to the outer colonies had become a nightmare. When pirates ambushed his convoy, the Stardancer had taken heavy damage protecting the civilian vessels, and now she was dying beneath him. Another explosion rocked the ship, sending Nix sprawling across the deck. Emergency lighting bathed everything in hellish red as primary systems failed one by one. Through the chaos, he heard the metallic voice of his ship's AI delivering the news he'd been dreading. Hull breach imminent, life support failing, impact in 47 seconds. Nix dragged himself back to the pilot's seat, his ribs screaming in protest. Blood trickled down his forehead, and his vision blurred at the edges. He'd survived 3 wars and countless battles, but it looked like this unnamed world would be his grave. "Not today," he growled, initiating the emergency landing sequence. If he was going down, he'd do it on his terms. The ship hit the desert floor like a meteor, carving a furrow through the red sand before finally coming to rest against a massive crystal formation. Steam hissed from ruptured coolant lines, and the acrid smell of burning circuits filled the air. Nix hung upside down in his restraints, ears ringing, tasting copper and smoke. Somehow, he was alive. It took him nearly an hour to extract himself from the wreckage and assess the damage. The Stardancer would never fly again. Without extensive repairs he couldn't make with the limited resources scattered around the crash site. His emergency beacon was functional, but this far from civilization, rescue could take months, or even years. The desert stretched endlessly in all directions, broken only by those strange crystal spires that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. The twin suns hung like angry eyes in a bronze sky, and the heat was already beginning to take its toll despite his environmental suit's best efforts. Nix was inventorying his meager supplies when he saw them approaching a group of riders mounted on creatures that looked like a cross between horses and dragons. Their scales gleamed in the harsh sunlight, and their riders sat them with the easy grace of born warriors. The lead rider dismounted as they reached the crash site. She was tall and lean, her skin the color of burnished copper and marked with intricate tattoos that seemed to move in the shifting light. Her hair was black as space, braided with small metal ornaments that chimed softly when she moved. She wore armor that appeared to be made from the same crystalline material as the spires, and a curved sword hung at her hip. Most striking were her eyes, violet as nebulae and just as mysterious. They studied Nix with an intelligence that made him feel suddenly exposed, as if she could see through his environmental suit to the man beneath. "Sky fallen," she said in accented standard, her voice like distant thunder. "You live when the gods clearly meant you to die." Nix raised his hands, slowly, showing he was unarmed. "My ship malfunctioned. I mean no harm to you or your people." She circled him like a predator, her companions spreading out to flank him. "I am Kestra of the Crimson Blade clan," she announced, "daughter of Joruk the Flame-Bearer, princess of the Fourth Territory. You have crashed on our sacred lands, stranger. By ancient law, your life is forfeit." "Wait," Nix said, his mind racing. He'd studied dozens of alien cultures in his years as a trader, and he recognized the formal challenge in her tone. "Surely there's some way to make amends. I have trade, goods, technology." Kestra's laugh was sharp as breaking glass. "Technology? You think your star metal trinkets have value here?" She gestured at the wreckage of his ship. "Your greatest achievement could not even keep you aloft." One of her companions, a scarred warrior with ritual burns covering half his face, spoke in their own language. Kestra's expression shifted, becoming thoughtful rather than hostile. Bane speaks wisdom, she said finally. Perhaps the gods did not intend your death, but your testing. Tell me, Skyfallen, what is your name, Nyx? He replied, instinctively omitting his rank and true identity. Something told him that being a disgraced captain would not improve his standing with these people. Nyx, she rolled the name around, her tongue like she was tasting wine. In our tongue, it means shadow between stars, fitting for one who has fallen from the void. She remounted her creature with fluid grace. You will come with us, Nyx Shadow Walker. Our laws are clear. The Skyfallen must prove their worth, or provide their blood to consecrate the sands. As they rode toward the horizon, Nyx learned more about his captors. The people called themselves the Zephyrian clans, descendants of an ancient warrior culture that had evolved on this harsh world. Strength was everything here. Strength determined leadership, territory, and most importantly, the right to choose one's mate. Your people marry for love? Nyx asked as they rode, trying to understand the complex social structure Kestra described. Love. Kestra glanced back at him, her violet eyes unreadable. Love is earned through combat. The strongest warriors choose their mates from among the defeated. It ensures our bloodlines remain pure and powerful. And if someone doesn't want to fight, then they become servants or they die. Her tone was matter of fact, as if she were discussing the weather. Weakness is not tolerated in the deep desert. The sands claim the weak, and the strong inherit the wind. Their destination proved to be a sprawling settlement built around a massive oasis. Crystalline towers rose from the water's edge, their surfaces reflecting the twin suns in patterns that seemed almost hypnotic. People moved between buildings carved directly from the living rock, their clothes bright splashes of color against the monochrome landscape. As they entered the settlement, Nyx became aware of the attention they were drawing. People stopped their work to stare at the stranger, their expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. Children ran alongside their mounts, chattering excitedly in the local tongue until their parents called them back. The palace, for lack of a better word, was a marvel of engineering that seemed to grow organically from the desert floor. Its walls were the same crystalline material as everything else, but here they'd been shaped and molded into flowing forms that captured and redirected the brutal sunlight into something almost beautiful. Jorek the Flame Bearer was exactly what Nyx had expected from a desert chieftain, tall, broad-shouldered, with graying hair and scars that spoke of countless battles. His eyes were the same violet as his daughter's, but where hers held mystery, his held judgment. Father, Kestra said, dismounting in the courtyard, I bring you the Skyfallen. His ship lies broken in the whispering sands, but he lives. Jorek studied Nyx with the calculating gaze of a man who had ruled through strength and cunning. The omens spoke of fire from the sky, he said finally, but they did not speak of survival. You interest me, stranger. What skills do you bring to our people? Nyx thought quickly. His piloting abilities were useless here, and his knowledge of interstellar politics wouldn't help him survive in a warrior culture. But he'd learned other skills in his years among the stars, skills that might translate to this harsh world. I'm a fighter, he said, which was true enough. I've fought in 3 wars and survived battles that killed better men than me. Words Jorek dismissed with a wave. Here, we prove ourselves through action. You will face the circle of testing. If you survive 7 challenges, you will be granted the right to remain among us as a free warrior. If you fail, he shrugged eloquently. And if I refuse? Kestra's hand moved to her sword hilt. Then you provide the blood debt immediately. That evening, as Nyx was given quarters in a small chamber carved from the crystal walls, he reflected on the impossible situation he found himself in. He was a pilot, not a gladiator. His battles had been fought from the bridge of a starship, not in hand-to-hand combat on an arena floor, but as he watched the twin suns set through his narrow window, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson, he felt something stirring within him that he hadn't experienced in years. Purpose. For too long, he'd been drifting through space, taking whatever jobs would pay the bills and keep him moving. Here, for the first time since his disgrace, he had a real challenge. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Kestra entered without waiting for permission, carrying a tray of food and what looked like water. Tomorrow you face your first trial, she said, setting the tray down on a small table. "Bane will be your opponent. He has killed 17 men in single combat." "Encouraging," Nix muttered, picking at the unfamiliar food. It tasted like spiced meat, with an underlying flavor he couldn't identify. "You are afraid." It wasn't a question. Nix met her gaze steadily. "I'd be a fool not to be. But fear and cowardice aren't the same." Thing Summit. The arena floor was polished obsidian that reflected the twin suns like black mirrors, and the heat radiating from its surface made the air shimmer like water. Nix stood at the center of the circular pit, sweat already beading on his forehead. Despite the early hour, round him, tiers of crystalline seats rose in concentric circles, filled with hundreds of Zephyrians who had come to witness the Sky-Fallen's first trial. Across the arena, Bane emerged from the warrior's gate. The scarred fighter moved with the fluid grace of a predator, his ritual burns catching the morning light like badges of honor. In his hands, he carried twin curved blades that sang softly as they cut through the air. "First blood or death, Jorik's voice boomed across the arena from his elevated throne. "First blood," Kestra called out before Nix could respond, earning murmurs from the crowd. "The Sky-Fallen has not yet proven himself worthy of a death match." Bane's scarred face twisted in what might have been disappointment, but he nodded acceptance. The rules were simple. First to draw blood would claim victory. It seemed straightforward enough, but Nix had learned long ago that simple rarely meant easy. Elder Mirren, the clan's ancient priestess, raised her staff. The gnarled woman's eyes were milky with age, but her voice carried the authority of decades. "Let the spirits judge the worthy," she intoned. "Begin." Bane moved like lightning, closing the distance between them in 3 fluid strides. His blades whistled through the air where Nix's head had been a split second before. The pilot rolled aside, coming up in a defensive crouch as muscle memory from his military training kicked in. The crowd's roar was deafening as the 2 warriors circled each other. Nix had been given a traditional Zephyrian blade, a single-edged weapon with a slight curve that felt alien in his hands. He was used to energy weapons and shipboard combat, not this ancient dance of steel and skill. Bane pressed his attack, his twin blades weaving patterns in the air that seemed almost hypnotic. Nix parried desperately, the shock of each impact sending vibrations up his arms. The scarred warrior was toying with him, he realized, testing his defenses, looking for weaknesses. "You fight like a merchant," Bane taunted an accented standard, his blades never slowing. "All defense, no fire." Nix said nothing, conserving his breath. He'd learned patience in the void between stars, and he could see that Bane's aggressive style was already taking its toll. Sweat glistened on the warrior's scarred skin, and his breathing was becoming labored in the heat. When Bane overextended on a particularly ambitious strike, Nix saw his opening. Instead of retreating, he stepped inside the warrior's guard, using his blade's hilt to strike at a nerve cluster he'd learned about in military hand-to-hand training. Bane grunted and stumbled, his left arm momentarily paralyzed. The crowd fell, silent as Nix's blade found the warrior's throat, drawing a thin line of crimson. "Victory, by the slimmest of margins. First blood to the Sky-Fallen," Jorik announced, though his tone suggested he was more surprised than pleased. "The trial is won." As Nix helped Bane to his feet, the scarred warrior grinned despite his defeat. "You fight strangely, Starman, but effectively. I look forward to our next meeting." Over the following weeks, Nix faced 6 more trials. He defeated a beast tamer, whose crystalline whip could slice through stone. He outmaneuvered a tracker who could follow a shadow across solid rock. Each victory earned him grudging respect from the clan, but also growing suspicion. It was after his 5th victory that Thane Bloodspear arrived. The rival warlord rode into the settlement at the head of a column of warriors whose armor bore the scorched emblems of the northern reaches. Thane himself was a giant of a man, easily 7 feet tall, with ritual scars covering every visible inch of his skin. His mount was not one of the elegant crystal-scaled creatures the local clans favored, but a massive armored beast that looked like it had been carved from living rock. "Jorik Flamebearer," Thane's voice carried across the courtyard like rolling thunder. "I come seeking audience, as is my right under the ancient treaties." Jorik emerged from his palace, flanked by his personal guard. The tension between the two leaders was immediately apparent. Old rivals, who had fought too many battles to ever truly trust one another. Thane Bloodspear. Jorek replied formally, "You are welcome in my domain, as custom demands." "What brings the Lord of the Northern reaches so far from his frozen mountains?" Thane's pale eyes swept the assembled crowd until they found Nyx. "I come seeking the Sci-Fi. Word of his victories has reached even my distant halls." Nyx stepped forward, feeling the weight of hundreds of gazes upon him. "I'm here." "So you are." Thane dismounted, his massive frame making even Jorek look small by comparison. "Tell me, Starman, what do you know of the Crimson Prophecy?" The question caught Nyx off guard. He glanced at Kestra, who had gone pale at the mention of the prophecy. "I've never heard of it." Elder Mirren hobbled forward, her ancient staff clicking against the crystal courtyard. "The Crimson Prophecy speaks of one who will fall from the burning sky," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the space. "One who will unite the clans through strength of arms and purity of purpose," and Thane added with a cruel smile, "one who will claim the greatest prize of all, the hand of the Flame-Bearer's daughter." The courtyard erupted in startled murmurs. Nyx felt his stomach drop as he realized the true scope of what he'd stumbled into. This wasn't just about survival anymore. Political alliances, ancient prophecies, and the fate of an entire people hung in the balance. Kestra's face had gone from pale to furious. "The prophecy speaks of a worthy champion," she said, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Not some convenient interpretation to serve your ambitions, Thane. Then let worthiness be tested." Thane replied smoothly, "I invoke the right of challenge. The Skyfallen will face me in single combat. If he wins, I will acknowledge his claim to the prophecy. If I win," he shrugged, the gesture somehow more threatening than any explicit threat. "The right of challenge cannot be refused," Elder Mirren intoned reluctantly, "but neither can it be forced upon an unwilling participant. The choice belongs to the Skyfallen." All eyes turned to Nyx. He could feel the weight of their expectations, their hopes and fears crystallizing around this moment. Refuse, and he would be seen as a coward. Accept, and he would face a warrior whose reputation for brutality was legendary, even among the harsh clans of the deep desert. But there was something else, something he saw in Kestra's violet eyes that made his decision for him. Not fear, exactly, but a desperate hope that someone would finally stand against the forces that sought to control her fate. "I accept," Nyx said quietly, and the courtyard erupted in cheers and shouts of dismay. That evening, as Nyx prepared for what might be his final battle, Kestra came to him again. This time, she carried not food, but weapons of blade unlike any he had seen before, its crystal surface seeming to hold captured starlight. "This was my mother's sword," she said, setting it reverently on the table. "It has never known defeat." "I can't accept this," Nyx protested. "It belongs to your family." "My family will not exist much longer if Thane claims victory tomorrow," she replied bluntly. "He seeks to unite the clans under his rule, and marriage to me would legitimize his claim to my father's territory." Nyx picked up the blade, surprised by its perfect balance. Despite its crystalline appearance, it felt warm in his hands, almost alive. "Why are you helping me? You barely know me." Kestra was quiet for a long moment, staring out the narrow window at the desert beyond. "Because you are the first man I have met who does not see me as a prize to be won," she said finally. "You fight for survival, not conquest. There is honor in that. And if I lose tomorrow?" She turned to face him, and for the first time since he'd met her, he saw vulnerability in those violet eyes. "Then I will face my fate as a warrior should. But I would rather die free than live as Thane's possession." The next morning dawned blood-red, the twin suns rising through a haze of dust kicked up by the desert winds. The arena was packed beyond capacity, with representatives from dozens of clans come to witness what many believed would be the fulfillment of ancient prophecy. Thane entered the arena like a force of nature, his massive frame clad in armor that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. His weapon was a two-handed blade nearly as tall as Nyx himself, its edge gleaming with an oily sheen that suggested poison or worse, no mercy. Thane bellowed to the crowd, no quarter. This ends in death. Nyx drew his mother's blade, and gasps echoed through the arena as its crystal surface began to glow with inner fire. The weapon felt different now, not just a tool, but an extension of his will. For the honor of the clans, Elder Mirren called out, "Let the worthy prevail." Thane's first attack nearly ended the fight before it began. His massive blade carved through the air with enough force to split stone, missing Nyx's head by inches. The pilot rolled aside, the crystal sword singing as it deflected a follow-up strike that would have taken his arm off at the shoulder. The crowd roared as the two warriors danced their deadly dance across the obsidian floor. Thane was stronger, more experienced, and armed with reach that kept Nyx constantly on the defensive. But the giant was also overconfident. Used to intimidating opponents into submission through sheer brutal force, Nyx began to see the patterns in Thane's attacks, the slight telegraphing th. The celebration feast lasted 3 days, but Nyx found himself increasingly restless as the hours wore on. Victory over Thane had elevated his status among the clans, from curiosity to something approaching reverence, yet he felt more isolated than ever. Warriors who had once ignored him now sought his attention, eager to bask in reflected glory. Clan leaders whispered among themselves, no doubt calculating how his presence might shift the delicate balance of desert politics. But it was the way Kestra looked at him that troubled him most. Where once her violet eyes had held mystery and careful assessment, now they burned with something far more dangerous: hope. On the third night, as the last of the revelers finally stumbled home, Nyx escaped to the crystalline gardens that surrounded the palace. The twin moons cast everything in silver light, and the desert blooms that only opened in darkness filled the air with their exotic perfume. He was examining a flower whose petals seemed to contain trapped starlight when soft footsteps announced another's presence. "You cannot sleep either." Kestra emerged from the shadows, having traded her ceremonial robes for simple traveling clothes. Without the formal trappings of her rank, she looked younger, more vulnerable. "Too much to think about," Nyx admitted, settling onto a bench carved from living crystal. "Your people see me as some prophesied savior, but I'm just a pilot who got luck." Kestra sat beside him, careful to maintain a proper distance. "You defeated Thane Bloodspear in single combat. Luck does not account for such skill. Experience does. I've fought in 3 wars, Kestra. I've seen enough violence to last several lifetimes." He stared up at the alien constellations, searching for familiar patterns that weren't there. "Sometimes I wonder if the stars brought me here as punishment or reward." Before she could respond, a new voice cut through the garden's tranquility. "Perhaps they brought you here for neither." They turned to see Zara approaching along the moonlit path. The clan's healer was a woman of middle years, her silver-streaked hair bound in the intricate braids that marked her profession. Unlike the warriors, her hands were gentle, scarred only by the thorns of the medicinal plants she gathered in the deep desert. "Zara." Kestra rose respectfully. The healer was beloved among all the clans, her neutrality in political matters making her welcome, even in the camps of enemies. "What brings you to the gardens so late?" "The same restlessness that brings you both, I suspect." Zara's knowing smile suggested she was aware of the undercurrents flowing between them. Great changes create great unease, even in those who benefit from them. She settled on the bench across from them, her movements deliberate and graceful. Despite her years, "Tell me, Sci-Fi, what do you know of your own history?" The question caught Nyx off guard. "My history? I don't understand." "The stars keep records, do they not? Logs of journeys, chronicles of deeds done in the void between worlds." Zara's dark eyes seemed to see more than they should. 3 days ago, as you fought Thane, I felt the desert itself stir. The crystals sang with harmonics I have not heard in my lifetime." Kestra leaned forward, intrigued. "What kind of harmonics?" "The kind that speak of destiny approaching." Zara reached into her healer's pouch and withdrew a small device clearly of off-world manufacture, though Nyx couldn't identify its specific purpose. "This was brought to me by a young warrior named Brix, found in the deep sands near your crash site. Perhaps you recognize it." NYX's breath caught as he identified the device. It was a personal data recorder, the kind every starship carried for emergency transmissions. But this one bore the insignia of the Galactic Merchant Marine, his old unit, before his disgrace. Where exactly did Brix find this? His voice was carefully controlled, but Kestra's sharp eyes caught the tension in his posture. 3 days' ride into the singing wastes, Zara replied, along with the wreckage of what appears to be a small scout vessel. Recent wreckage, no more than a 10-day-old. The implications hit Nix like a physical blow. Someone had been looking for him. The recorder might contain messages from his old life, from people who still believed in the man he'd been before everything went wrong. I need to see that wreckage, he said, rising abruptly. Of course, Zara's smile was enigmatic. Brix waits in the stables with fresh mounts. I thought you might wish to investigate immediately. As they prepared for the journey, Nix found himself paired with Kestra on what the locals called a harmony ride, two riders sharing the care of their mounts across long distances. It was, he realized too late, another of the subtle courtship rituals that seemed to permeate every aspect of Zephyrian culture. Brix proved to be a warrior barely out of adolescence, his eager face unmarked by the scars that decorated his elders. He led them through the crystalline maze of the deep desert, with the confidence of one born to the sands, following landmarks invisible to off-world eyes. The crystals spoke to me, he explained as they rode, his mount's scales shimmering in the heat, called me to the place where star metal lay broken on the sacred sands. You hear the crystals? Nix asked, genuinely curious. In his travels, he'd encountered many cultures that claimed mystical connections to their environment, but few that seemed to demonstrate actual results. All children of the desert hear them, Kestra replied, some more clearly than others. Brix has the strongest gift of his generation. The wreckage, when they finally reached it, told a story that made Nix's chest tight with unexpected emotion. The ship was indeed a scout vessel, its hull bearing the scorch marks of recent atmospheric entry. But it wasn't a search and rescue craft, it was a personal transport. The kind wealthy individuals used for private travel. Valen, Nix whispered, recognizing the ship's configuration. Only one person he knew favored this particular model, modified for long-range stealth operations. Inside the twisted hull, they found what remained of the ship's computer core. Brix's crystalline sensitivity proved invaluable as he guided them to components that still held data. When Nix finally activated the personal recorder Zara had brought, the familiar voice that emerged from its speakers nearly brought him to his knees. NYX, if you're hearing this, then you survived the crash. Thank the void for small mercies. The voice belonged to Valen Crosswind, Nix's former wingman and closest friend in the Merchant Marine. I've been tracking your course since the pirate attack. The civilian convoy made it safely to New Harmony Station. By the way, all 600 souls, including the children from the orbital nursery, they're calling you a hero back home. Nix closed his eyes, overwhelmed by emotions he'd kept buried for months. He'd saved them, the families, the children. They were safe. The court-martial has been overturned. Valen's recorded voice continued. New evidence came to light about the pirate attack. Turns out it was coordinated with corrupt officials in the Trade Authority. Your actions prevented not just a massacre, but the exposure of a much larger conspiracy. The Admiral wants to see you back on active duty immediately. Kestra's sharp intake of breath reminded Nix that he wasn't alone. He opened his eyes to find her staring at him, with an expression he couldn't read. There's more, Valen's voice went on. I'm sending this message from my last known position. My ship took damage in a meteor shower, and I'm not sure I'll make it to the surface in one piece. If something happens to me, I want you to know the stars need you, old friend. The galaxy is changing, and it needs pilots who remember what honor means. The recording ended with coordinates and a personal message that Nix didn't share with his companions. As they searched the wreckage further, they found evidence that Valen had indeed survived the crash, at least initially. Survival supplies were missing, along with the ship's emergency beacon. He could still be alive, Kestra said quietly as they prepared to return home. Lost in the deep desert, waiting for rescue. If he survived the crash, the desert would have claimed him by now, Brix added matter-of-factly. No off-worlder can survive the singing wastes without guidance, but Nix wasn't listening to their debate. His mind was reeling with the implications of Valen's message. Vindicated, recalled to active duty, a chance to reclaim everything he'd lost when he'd chosen conscience over orders. The return journey passed in contemplative silence, each rider lost in their own thoughts. When they finally reached the settlement, they found it buzzing with unusual activity. Strange mounts were corralled near the palace, sleek mechanical constructs that could only be of off-world origin. Rescue ship, Nix breathed, recognizing the vehicles even at a distance dot in the palace courtyard. They found Jorik in deep conversation with a woman whose uniform marked her as galactic authority. She was middle-aged, competent-looking, with the bearing of someone accustomed to command. "Captain Valdris," she said when she spotted Nix, snapping to attention in a way that made several Zephyrian warriors reach for their weapons. "Captain sent a bright star, galactic search and rescue. I'm here to bring you home." The formal words hung in the desert air like a challenge. Nix was aware of dozens of eyes upon him. Measuring his reaction, weighing his response, Kestra stood beside him, her face carefully neutral, but he could feel the tension radiating from her like heat from sun-baked stone. "Captain," he acknowledged, falling into the formal patterns of military courtesy as easily as slipping into an old uniform. "I wasn't aware anyone was looking for me." The attack came at dawn, when the twin suns hung low on the horizon and the settlement's guards were changing shifts. Nix was in the palace armory, examining the crystalline weapons that had become as familiar to him as his old sidearm when the first explosions shattered the morning calm. He rushed to the nearest window, his blood turning to ice at what he saw. Armed riders were pouring through the settlement's outer defenses, not the honorable warriors of rival clans, but mercenaries whose mismatched armor and weapons spoke of lawless men, bought with foreign coin. At their head rode a figure in pristine black armor that seemed to drink in the morning light. Gideon, Nix breathed, recognizing the silhouette even at a distance. His former second-in-command had found him at last. The sound of running feet echoed through the corridors as palace guards mobilized, their crystalline weapons singing with stored energy. Davin, Kestra's younger brother, burst into the armory with his sword already drawn. The youth bore a strong resemblance to his sister, but where Kestra's eyes held depths of wisdom earned through trials, Davin's burned with the reckless fire of untested courage. "Sky-Fallen," Davin's voice cracked slightly with urgency. "Armed strangers attacked the settlement. My sister sends word protect the elders while she leads the defense." Through the palace's crystal walls, Nix could see the battle raging in the streets below. The attackers moved with military precision, their formation speaking of professional training rather than the clan-based tactics he'd grown accustomed to. But it was their target that made his stomach clench with dread. They weren't looting or claiming territory. They were driving straight for the palace, cutting through defenders with ruthless efficiency. "This isn't a raid," Nix muttered, grabbing his mother's crystal blade and the traditional armor he'd been gifted after his victory over Thane. "It's an extraction." Davin's young face twisted in confusion. "Extraction? I don't understand." Before Nix could explain, a new complication announced itself with the thunder of exotic engines. 3 more ships descended from the dawn sky, sleek predators bearing the unmistakable marks of corporate security forces. Nix's heart sank as he recognized the insignia on their hulls: Meridian Industries, the very corporation whose civilian convoy he'd saved in his last official act. "Captain," Brightstar's voice crackled through his salvaged communicator. "Captain Valdris, we're detecting hostile forces in your vicinity. My orders are to extract you immediately, with or without your consent." "Negative," Nix replied, securing the comm unit to his armor. "I won't abandon these people. Sir, those aren't just raiders down there. My sensors are picking up energy signatures consistent with military-grade weapons. Someone wants you very badly, and they're willing to kill a lot of innocents to get you." The implications hit Nix like a physical blow. This wasn't about clan politics or ancient prophecies. Someone from his past had tracked him to this world, bringing violence to people who had shown him nothing but honor. As he and Davin raced through the palace corridors toward the defensive positions, his mind churned through possibilities and probabilities. They found Kestra on the palace's main balcony, directing the defense with calm authority that would have impressed any military commander. Her crystalline armor caught the sunlight as she moved, and her sword hummed with deadly purpose. Round her, clan warriors took position behind crystal barriers that could stop most projectile weapons but offered little protection against the energy blasters the attackers were using. Nyx, she turned as he approached, relief and fear warring in her violet eyes. Thank the spirits you're safe. These aren't normal raiders, they fight like your star warriors, with weapons that burn through our shields, because they are star warriors. Nyx replied grimly, studying the tactical situation below. Mercenaries, by the look of their gear. Someone hired them to take me alive, then give them what they want. Davin burst out, his youth making him speak without thinking. If you surrender yourself, they'll leave our people alone. Kestra's backhanded slap sent her brother stumbling, her face blazing with fury. You would speak of surrender, of trading a guest's life for our comfort. What warrior blood flows in your veins? Peace, Nyx said, stepping between the siblings before their argument could escalate. He's not wrong to consider it. These people are dying because of me. These people are dying because someone chose to bring war to our lands, Kestra corrected. Sharply, the responsibility lies with the attackers, not their target. Their debate was interrupted by a new voice, amplified by technological means to carry across the battlefield. Captain Nyx Valdris of the Galactic Merchant Marine. By order of the Meridian Corporate Council, you are commanded to surrender yourself for transport to face charges of desertion, theft of corporate property, and conspiracy against lawful commerce. Nyx's blood ran cold as he recognized the speaker. Commander Gideon Stark had been his second-in-command during the final mission, the one who had supported the order to bomb the civilian colony, the man who had branded Nyx a traitor when he'd refused to murder innocents. Gideon, he whispered, the name tasting like poison on his tongue. You know this voice? Kestra's eyes sharpened with understanding. This is personal hatred, not duty. Below them, the attackers had established a perimeter around the palace, their superior weapons keeping the Zephyrian defenders pinned behind cover. But they weren't pressing their advantage, they were waiting for something. Captain Valdris, Gideon's voice boomed again. I offer one final chance for honorable surrender. Come down now, and I give my word that no further harm will come to these primitives. The insult sparked fresh anger among the defenders, but Nyx barely heard it. His attention was fixed on movement in the settlement's periphery, where additional figures were taking position. Not more mercenaries, these moved with the fluid grace he'd come to associate with Zephyrian. Warriors, reinforcements, he asked hopefully. Kestra followed his gaze and her expression darkened. Worse, those are warriors of the Sunset clans, sworn enemies of my father's house. It seems your former companion has made alliances with our rivals. The tactical situation was becoming impossible. Attacked from without by superior technology. Betrayed from within by old enemies who saw opportunity in the chaos. Nyx found himself thinking like the military commander he'd once been. Calculating odds and weighing sacrifices. There's another way. A new voice interrupted his dark thoughts. Mira, a princess from one of the smaller allied clans, had somehow made her way to their position despite the battle raging below. She was beautiful in the way of desert flowers, delicate in appearance, but hiding thorns beneath the surface. What do you mean? Kestra's tone suggested a history of rivalry between the two women. The old laws, Mira said, her eyes fixed on Nyx with calculating intensity. Trial by combat. If Captain Valdris can defeat Gideon in single battle, the attackers must withdraw by the ancient codes of honor warfare. Those codes only apply to clan disputes. Davin protested. Off-worlders know nothing of our traditions. But Captain Valdris is no longer an off-worlder, Mira replied smoothly. He has been accepted into our society, claimed victory in our arenas. By law, he has the right to invoke traditional justice. Nyx saw the trap immediately. Mira was offering him a way to end the violence, but at the cost of binding himself permanently to Zephyrian law. Accept the challenge, and he could never return to his old life among the stars. Refuse, and he condemned countless innocents to death in a war that was entirely his fault. It's a trick, Kestra said quietly, her warrior's instincts recognizing the political maneuvering. She seeks to claim you for her own clan through the bonds of traditional law. Maybe, Nyx replied, studying the beautiful princess with new appreciation for her cunning. But it's also a solution. Before anyone could argue further, the decision was taken from his hands. Elder Mirren appeared on the balcony as if she'd materialized from the morning mist, her ancient staff clicking against the crystal floor with each step. "The spirits have spoken," the old priestess announced, her blind eyes somehow finding Nyx among the gathered warriors. "The Sky Fallen will face his past in the circle of truth. Let worthiness be tested, and let the worthy prevail." The formal words carried the weight of religious law, binding all present to their consequences. Even as part of Nyx's mind recoiled from the trap closing around him, another part felt a strange sense of relief. For too long, he'd been running from his choices, hiding on this desert world while the galaxy burned around him. Perhaps it was time to face the consequences of his honor. "I accept the trial," he said formally, his words carrying to every warrior. On the balcony, Kestra's face went pale, but she nodded slowly. "Then it will be done according to the ancient ways. Single combat, to the death or surrender, witnessed by the spirits of the deep desert." The necks are passed in a blur of preparation and ritual. Word of the challenge spread through the settlement like wildfire, and even the attacking mercenaries seemed to pause in their assault as news reached their commander. Gideon's response, when it came, was predictably arrogant. The coward finally shows himself. "Yes, I accept this primitive trial. When I defeat you before your pet savages, they'll understand the superiority of civilized warfare." As the sun climbed toward its zenith, the great arena that had hosted Nyx's try